Have you ever walked into a room feeling energized, optimistic, and entirely in control of your day, only to have your mood completely plummet within minutes of interacting with a specific person? You did not make a conscious, deliberate decision to feel exhausted or irritated. There was no logical debate that persuaded you to abandon your positive outlook. Yet somehow, the heavy, draining psychological energy of the person standing next to you seeped into your own mind like an invisible virus. Welcome to the hidden architecture of your brain, and more specifically, to the profound vulnerabilities of what Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman calls System 1 thinking. To truly understand how negativity spreads from one human being to another, we must recognize that our minds operate on two distinct tracks. System 2 is your conscious, analytical, and deliberate self. It is the rational voice in your head currently processing this video. But System 1 is the silent, automatic, lightning-fast machinery operating entirely below your conscious awareness. It processes the world through deeply ingrained instincts, immediate emotional reactions, and associative memory. When you encounter a chronic complainer, a relentless pessimist, or someone radiating toxic stress, your rational System 2 believes it is merely listening to a harmless conversation. However, your System 1 is doing something far more primal and dangerous. It is unconsciously synchronizing with their neurological state. Emotional contagion is not a poetic metaphor. It is a rapid, uncontrollable biological reflex wired into our species for survival. Before your rational brain can even begin to assess the validity of their complaints, your automatic systems have already downloaded their emotional baseline. In this comprehensive psychological breakdown, we will deconstruct the exact mechanics of how negative people hijack your mind, why your brain is biologically complicit in this sabotage, and how you can build an impenetrable emotional shield. To comprehend why the emotional negativity of others is so intensely and instantaneously contagious, we have to travel back hundreds of thousands of years and examine the evolutionary blueprints of the human brain. The fundamental, uncompromising reality of human psychology is that we are not inherently wired for happiness, contentment, or inner peace. We are meticulously wired for survival. In the harsh, unforgiving, and radically unpredictable environment of our ancient hunter-gatherer ancestors, survival depended almost entirely on paying extraordinary hyper-focused attention to bad news. Imagine for a moment the daily reality of early Homo sapiens. If a fellow tribe member came running over a hill with a joyous expression to inform you about a beautiful, fragrant field of flowers they just discovered, ignoring their positive emotion might cost you a pleasant afternoon. It is a missed opportunity, but it is not fatal. However, if that exact same tribe member came sprinting toward you with dilated pupils, a panicked voice, and a look of sheer, unadulterated terror to warn you of an approaching apex predator or a hostile neighboring tribe, ignoring their negative emotional state would almost certainly cost you your life. Our ancestors who survived to pass on their genes were the ones who were highly attuned to the negative emotions of those around them. We are the descendants of those anxious, hyper-vigilant survivors. This profound evolutionary heritage birthed one of the most powerful cognitive phenomena in behavioral economics and psychology, a concept known as the negativity bias. The negativity bias is the well-documented psychological principle that negative events, negative emotions, and negative interpersonal interactions carry a significantly heavier psychological weight and command far more neurological processing power than positive ones of the exact same magnitude. When we view this through the lens of Daniel Kahneman's dual system theory, it becomes clear that System 1, our fast, automatic, and intuitive processor, is constantly scanning the environment for threats. To System 1, negative emotions displayed by others are not merely social cues, they are blazing red warning sirens. This bias is deeply and inextricably tied to another foundational concept pioneered by Kahneman and Amos Tversky, loss aversion. In the realm of behavioral economics, loss aversion demonstrates that the psychological pain of losing $50 is approximately twice as intense as the psychological joy of gaining $50. We feel losses much more acutely than we feel equivalent gains. When we transpose this economic principle into the realm of emotional dynamics, the exact same asymmetry applies. Our brains treat emotional inputs with a heavily skewed bias toward the negative. When you are exposed to a highly positive, radiant person, your System 1 processes their joy as a nice-to-have luxury. It is a psychological gain. But when you are trapped in a room with a highly negative, anxious, cynical, or hostile person, your System 1 processes their emotional state as a critical, immediate threat to your survival and psychological equilibrium. It registers as an impending loss of safety or stability because the brain weights losses so heavily. It forces your attention onto the negative person, preventing you from looking away or tuning them out. Because your brain treats this incoming negativity as an urgent alarm bell, it automatically allocates an immense, disproportionate amount of cognitive bandwidth to process it. Consider your own daily lived experiences as empirical evidence of this phenomenon. You can receive 10 glowing compliments on your professional work, your appearance, or your character in a single morning. You will likely feel a brief surge of dopamine smile, and then completely forget about those compliments by lunchtime. The positive data is quickly discarded because it does not require urgent action. But consider what happens when you receive one passive-aggressive comment, one cynical remark, or one harsh, unfair criticism from a coworker or family member. That single negative data point will loop endlessly in your mind, replaying over and over, keeping you wide awake at 3 in the morning as you stare at the ceiling. You are not experiencing this because you are fundamentally weak, uniquely insecure, or overly sensitive. You are experiencing this because your System 1 is desperately, relentlessly analyzing the negative data to ensure you survive what it perceives as a legitimate threat. When a chronically negative person enters your immediate environment, they are essentially and often unconsciously hijacking this ancient hardwired survival mechanism. Through their complaints, their sighs, their pessimistic language, and their agitated body language, they broadcast continuous signals of danger, dissatisfaction, and fear. Your automatic mind, functioning exactly as evolution intended it, drops almost everything else to tune into that specific broadcast frequency. You become instantly hypervigilant. Without consciously choosing to do so, you start scanning your shared environment for the precise problems they are complaining about. Their anxiety rapidly becomes your anxiety. Their frustration becomes your frustration because your primitive brain operates on the assumption that if a member of your tribe is panicked, there must be a predator lurking just out of sight in the tall grass. The grand, exhausting tragedy of modern human life is that the predator triggering this intense biological response is almost never a saber-toothed tiger or a life-threatening famine. Today, the stimuli triggering this massive systemic alarm are usually trivialities: a minor office dispute over a spreadsheet, a traffic jam on the highway, a cynical political post on social media, or a friend who perpetually views themselves as a victim of circumstance. Yet, the emotional contagion mechanism fires with the exact same life or death intensity. Your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing you for a physical confrontation or a desperate escape, but there is nowhere to run and nothing to physically fight. Instead, you are forced to sit there absorbing the toxic stress, trapped in a cycle of shared misery that serves absolutely no productive modern purpose. You are left managing a neurochemical cocktail of stress hormones generated by someone else's distorted perception of reality. To fully grasp the magnitude of this evolutionary trap, we must recognize that System 1 does not ask for permission to feel these things. It does not consult your rational System 2 before initiating the stress response. The moment the negative stimuli are detected, the cascade begins. This is why attempting to simply ignore a highly negative person often feels like a physically exhausting battle. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that is screaming at you to pay attention to the threat. Your logical mind knows the complaining coworker is not a danger to your physical safety, but your biological hardware is convinced otherwise. This deep-seated disconnect between our modern reality and our ancient neurological wiring is the fertile ground where emotional contagion takes root and flourishes, priming your mind for the psychological takeover. We have established why the primitive brain prioritizes negativity to ensure our physical survival, but a crucial question remains: how exactly does the transfer of this negative emotional state happen so instantaneously? How does a mood travel across a room through the air and directly into your nervous system without a single word being spoken? The answer lies not in mystical energy, but in the tangible biological hardware of the brain itself specifically. Within a specialized network of cells known as mirror neurons, discovered by neuroscientists in the 1990s, mirror neurons are the fundamental biological building blocks of human empathy, social learning, and cultural cohesion. They are the reason we can connect with one another on a level deeper than language. To understand how they work, imagine watching someone accidentally slice their finger with a sharp knife while chopping vegetables. Even though you are completely unharmed, you will instinctively wince. You might even pull your own hand back, and you will feel a phantom flash of discomfort in your own finger. This is your mirror neuron system firing. When you observe an action or an emotion in another person, these specialized neurons fire in the exact same pattern in your brain as if you were performing the action or experiencing the emotion yourself. You do not just understand their pain intellectually. For a fraction of a second, your neurological architecture simulates a shadow of their physical and emotional reality. Now apply this automatic, unavoidable mirroring mechanism to your daily interactions with chronically negative people. When you sit across a desk or a dinner table from someone who is perpetually cynical, deeply stressed, or radiating quiet resentment, you are not merely a passive observer watching a movie. You are an active biological participant. Your System 1, the fast automatic processor, is constantly, relentlessly reading their micro-expressions. It notices the slight, almost imperceptible furrowing of their brow. It registers the tightening of their jaw muscles, the subtle drooping of their eyelids, the shallow and erratic rhythm of their breathing, and the tense, defeated slump of their shoulders. Before your conscious rational System 2 can even register what the conversation is about, your mirror neurons have already commanded your own nervous system and facial muscles to subtly mimic the negative person. Without realizing it, you begin to frown slightly. Your own breathing becomes shallower and faster, matching their stressed respiratory rate. Your posture mirrors their defensive, closed-off stance. You are physically becoming them. This unconscious physical mimicry triggers a terrifying and powerful psychological loop known in behavioral science as the facial feedback hypothesis. William James, one of the founding fathers of modern psychology, famously proposed a counterintuitive idea: we do not run away from a bear because we are afraid. We are afraid because we find ourselves running away. The physical action, he argued, precedes and creates the emotional state. Modern research has validated this concept. When your mirror neurons cause you to unconsciously adopt the physical posture, breathing rate, and facial expressions of the negative person in front of you, your brain continuously reads your own physical state to determine how you should feel. It scans your body and concludes, my jaw is tight, my shoulders are elevated and tense, my breathing is shallow, and my facial muscles are arranged in a scowl. Therefore, I must be stressed, angry, and unhappy. Through this invisible automatic hijacking of your physical architecture, the negative person has successfully bypassed your intellectual defenses and transmitted their toxic emotional state directly into your nervous system. You have caught the virus. And once you are infected, you fall victim to what Daniel Kahneman refers to as the affect heuristic. The affect heuristic is a powerful mental shortcut where our current emotional state dictates our decisions, our judgments, and our perception of reality. Once your System 1 has been hijacked by the physical mimicry of negativity, your entire emotional baseline plummets. You begin to view your own life, your own creative projects, your own career prospects, and your own relationships through the dark, pessimistic lens that was just forcibly handed to you by the other person. The objective reality of your world hasn't actually changed in the last 10 minutes. Only your emotional filter has. The negative person didn't just share a cynical opinion with you, they literally hacked your neurology side, stepped all of your logical, rational firewalls, and aggressively rewrote the code of your current emotional experience without asking for your permission. You are now feeling their feelings, and because of the affect heuristic, you will start finding logical reasons in your own life to justify why you feel so terrible. At this point, a perfectly rational viewer might ask, if System 1 is so easily hijacked by negative emotional contagion, why don't we simply use our rational logical System 2 to block it out? Why can't we just tell ourselves, this person is being irrational, their complaints are invalid, and I refuse to let their bad mood affect me? The answer to this introduces one of the most crucial, humbling, and dangerous concepts in behavioral psychology: ego depletion. System 2 is your conscious firewall. It is the sophisticated part of your brain capable of complex emotional regulation, rational detachment, long-term planning, and self-control. But System 2 has a massive biological vulnerability. It is incredibly lazy, and it consumes an immense amount of metabolic energy. Literally speaking, engaging System 2 burns through the brain's glucose reserves at an astonishing rate. Using System 2 requires intense, deliberate effort. Every single time you bite your tongue to stop yourself from arguing with a toxic coworker, every time you force a polite, accommodating smile while someone complains endlessly about things they refuse to fix, and every time you actively remind yourself not to absorb someone else's radiant stress, you are heavily taxing your system too. In modern psychology, self-control and emotional regulation are not infinite wellsprings of willpower. They are finite resources. They function exactly like a physical muscle that gets exhausted after heavy lifting. When you are forced to spend time around a highly negative person, your system too is forced to work overtime just to maintain your normal baseline of emotional neutrality. You are constantly, actively suppressing the automatic biological urge to either snap back at them in defensive anger or sink deeply into their depressive state. This invisible mental labor creates a severe compounding cognitive tax. As the minutes and hours pass in the presence of a chronic complainer, your ego, used here in the psychological sense of conscious self-control and willpower, becomes severely depleted. This phenomenon of ego depletion explains a universal human experience: why after spending an afternoon with a deeply pessimistic friend, a demanding boss, or a toxic family member, you don't just feel emotionally sad. You feel physically exhausted, mentally drained, profoundly lethargic, and incredibly irritable. Your system too has simply run out of fuel. The cognitive battery is dead. When ego depletion fully sets in, your rational firewall completely collapses. You no longer have the metabolic energy required to filter out their toxicity. You become fully exposed to the contagion. But the damage does not stop there. Because your system too is exhausted, it leaves you dangerously vulnerable in every other entirely unrelated area of your life. The cognitive resources you use to block out a negative person are the exact same resources you use to make healthy life choices. Extensive behavioral studies show that people in a state of ego depletion are significantly more likely to make impulsive, detrimental financial decisions. They are more likely to abandon their diets and consume junk food because resisting sugar requires the system 2 energy they no longer have. They are vastly more prone to procrastinate on important, meaningful work. Most tragically, when ego depletion hits, people are far more likely to lash out aggressively at the innocent people they actually love: their partners, their children, their friends, because they have no willpower left to regulate their frustration. The negative person in your life has not merely ruined your mood for the afternoon. By forcing your rational mind into an exhausting, protracted defensive war, they have literally drained the cognitive resources you desperately need to achieve your goals, maintain your physical health, and nurture your positive relationships. They leave you intellectually bankrupt and completely susceptible to the automatic primitive reactions of your own System 1. You become impatient, cynical, reactive, and hostile, ironically mirroring the exact toxic behavior of the negative person who drained you in the first place. You have not just absorbed their emotion, you have paid a massive cognitive tax that limits your potential as a human being. The emotional contagion effect reaches its most destructive and intractable peak when it moves beyond a mere one-on-one interaction and successfully infects an entire group, creating what behavioral scientists refer to as a toxic echo chamber. To truly understand how negativity can rapidly dismantle the culture of an entire team, fracture a family unit, or destroy a community, we must examine what happens when emotional contagion collides with another profoundly powerful flaw in human reasoning: confirmation bias paired with the availability heuristic. Once your System 1 has been successfully primed with a negative emotional state by a toxic individual, once you have unconsciously mirrored their posture and absorbed their stress, it fundamentally and radically alters the way your brain processes all new incoming information. Confirmation bias is the brain's hardwired tendency to exclusively search for interpret favor and remember information in a way that confirms its pre-existing beliefs or its current emotional state. The brain hates cognitive dissonance. It wants the external world to match its internal feelings. Therefore, if you catch a highly negative mood from a complaining colleague, your brain immediately and automatically begins to scan your environment for evidence that justifies why you feel so miserable. Suddenly, your perception of reality distorts. A slightly slow internet connection isn't just a minor temporary technological glitch. Through the lens of confirmation bias, it is absolute, undeniable proof that the company is falling apart and management is incompetent. A perfectly neutral, factual email from your boss is completely misinterpreted as a veiled passive-aggressive attack on your character. More dangerously, your brain actively ignores or suppresses all the positive aspects of your day. The successful completion of a major project, the excellent coffee in the break room, the supportive words from another friend, all of this positive data is discarded because it contradicts your current negative emotional state. You become completely blind to the good and intensely obsessively hypersensitive to the bad. Your brain is actively manufacturing a reality to match the mood you caught from someone else. When multiple people in a group are infected by this exact same emotional contagion, the dynamic shifts from individual cognitive distortion to a collective delusion. They begin to feed off one another through a psychological mechanism known as an availability cascade. This is how it works. One person in the group voices a cynical complaint about a new policy. The next person, whose system 1 is already primed by the negativity in the room, easily and instantly recalls a similar negative memory. This is the availability heuristic in action, the tendency to judge the frequency or importance of an event by how easily an example comes to mind. Because they are in a bad mood, negative memories are highly available. They share their grievance to validate the first person. The third person hears these two complaints, subconsciously assumes the problem must be massive and systemic because multiple people are talking about it, and enthusiastically adds their own slightly exaggerated grievance to the pile. What starts as a single individual's bad mood rapidly metastasizes into an undeniable collective reality. The availability cascade ensures that the complaint grows in magnitude and severity with every person who repeats it. Within an hour, a minor inconvenience has been rhetorically transformed into an existential crisis. The group begins to bond not over shared goals, shared values, or shared successes, but exclusively over shared grievances. This social dynamic is incredibly dangerous and highly addictive because bonding over negativity provides a powerful, deceptive neurological reward. When we complain together and validate each other's anger, our brains release a surge of dopamine and oxytocin. It feels incredibly good to be validated. It feels intoxicating to have an us versus them mentality, to feel like you are part of a unified tribe standing against an unfair world. But this neurochemical reward system is building the architecture of a cult of misery. The group becomes a closed, self-sustaining system where logical solutions, constructive feedback, and positive reframing are no longer welcome. In fact, if you attempt to introduce optimism, rational perspective, or a problem-solving mindset into this echo chamber, the group's collective system 1 will instantly reject you. They will perceive your positivity as a direct threat to their shared narrative and a betrayal of the group's social cohesion. The original negative person hasn't just spread a fleeting mood. They have successfully rewritten the social reality of the entire group, trapping everyone in a self-sustaining, neurochemically addictive loop of cognitive distortion and perpetual victimhood. Understanding the profound, almost mechanical power of emotional contagion can feel terrifying and deeply discouraging. If our ancient neurological hardware is biologically wired to absorb negativity, physically mimic it, become cognitively exhausted by it, and socially bond over it, are we simply helpless victims to the toxic people who populate our world? The answer is an absolute definitive no. Behavioral economics and cognitive psychology do not just reveal our structural flaws, they provide the precise blueprints for overcoming them. To protect yourself from emotional contagion, you must stop being a passive victim of your environment and become an active architect of your own mind. You must learn how to deliberately and forcefully engage System 2 to short-circuit the automatic primitive reactions of System 1. The first and most critical line of defense is cultivated awareness, utilizing a powerful psychological technique known as cognitive decoupling or affect labeling. The very moment you feel your energy dropping, your chest tightening, or your mood souring in the presence of a negative person, you must consciously and explicitly label what is happening in your mind by silently saying to yourself, "My mirror neurons are currently attempting to mimic this person's toxic stress. This anxiety I am feeling is not my emotion, it is a biological projection." You initiate a profound neurological shift. Brain imaging studies show that the simple act of putting a linguistic label on an emotional state dramatically reduces the activation of the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotional center. By labeling the process, you force your brain to switch processing power away from the fast emotional system 1 and route it up to the slow analytical and logical system 2, specifically the prefrontal cortex. Labeling an emotion strips it of its immediate biological power. It creates a critical psychological distance, instantly transforming you from a helpless victim experiencing a biological reflex into an objective, detached scientist observing a biological process. The second crucial strategy involves aggressively managing your cognitive load to prevent the ego depletion we discussed earlier. Because resisting negativity consumes immense willpower, you cannot rely on sheer endurance indefinitely. Instead, you must practice the power of the pause, introducing deliberate friction into the interaction. System 1 operates on immediate, automatic reactivity. When a negative person makes a cynical remark, your System 1 desperately wants to react either to argue, to agree, or to defend yourself. You must deny it that reaction. Instead of immediately responding, train yourself to wait 3 full agonizing seconds. Breathe deeply. This brief moment of manufactured friction is enough to prevent your automatic System 1 from snapping back defensively, giving your logical System 2 the precious time it needs to step in, evaluate the situation, and choose a neutral, non-reactive response. You are effectively starving the emotional fire of its necessary oxygen by remaining perfectly calm. Maintaining a neutral facial expression and offering zero emotional resonance or validation, you physically break the biological cycle of contagion. The negative person relies on your mirroring to sustain their own narrative. When you refuse to provide that energetic feedback loop, their negativity hits a brick wall and dissipates. Finally, for chronic situations, you must master the art of pre-mortems and implementation intentions for your social interactions. A pre-mortem is a cognitive strategy where you assume an upcoming event has already failed and you work backward to figure out why. Before entering a situation where you know you will inevitably encounter a chronically negative person, like a family holiday dinner or a mandatory staff meeting, mentally rehearse your boundaries in explicit detail. Formulate if-then plans. Tell yourself, if my coworker starts complaining about the management team, then I will smoothly change the subject to the weekend. Or, if my relative begins their usual pessimistic rant, then I will politely excuse myself to get a glass of water. By making these specific tactical decisions beforehand, you completely remove the heavy burden of decision-making from your System 2 in the heat of the moment. You are pre-programming a rational, protective response into your brain, ensuring that when the inevitable wave of negativity hits, your cognitive defenses are already fully deployed, unwavering, and entirely impenetrable. Ultimately, the most effective long-term strategy to manage the contagion of negative people is not just to fight them mentally, but to alter the physical and social structure of your environment entirely. In behavioral economics, this is known as designing your choice architecture. We are profoundly influenced by the paths of least resistance. If you constantly surround yourself with cynical, draining individuals, you are forcing your brain into a perpetual, exhausting state of cognitive defense. You are choosing to play the game on the hardest possible difficulty. You must take a ruthless, objective inventory of your social ecosystem. Design your daily life to dramatically increase the friction of interacting with negative sources. Unfollow toxic accounts and mute pessimistic voices on your social media feeds. Politely decline unnecessary meetings with chronic complainers and physically distance your workspace from the office pessimist. Simultaneously decrease the friction of interacting with optimistic-driven and growth-minded individuals. Make it easy to access people who elevate your cognitive baseline. Remember, the biological mechanism of emotional contagion works both ways. Just as you can easily catch the invisible virus of despair, anxiety, and cynicism, you can also absorb the incredible momentum of ambition, resilience, and profound joy. Your mirror neurons do not discriminate. They will reflect whatever you put in front of them. Protect your cognitive bandwidth as if it were your most valuable finite asset, because it is. If you found this deep dive into the architecture of the human mind valuable, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the psychological tools you need to master your reality. Thank you for watching, and stay rational.